Hi, everybody. Welcome to another special edition of the Casino Business Podcast. Today, we are talking to Travis Grode, a VIP casino marketing consultant who helped scale a $1 billion relationship marketing program across 40 casino properties. We'll get into what great casino hosting really looks like today, why a small percentage of players drive so much casino revenue, what breaks when you try to scale relationship marketing, and how casinos can use structure, data, and technology without losing the human touch. Travis, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The pleasure's all mine. I appreciate being on.
So you scaled a $1 billion VIP casino marketing program, again, across 40 plus properties. What did that teach you about what actually drives VIP revenue?
Yeah, it was definitely a learning experience. I found myself in that situation and I learned a lot about what not to do for sure. And it's one of those things. I mean, the interesting part of relationship marketing or VIP marketing is that you have this small subset, typically 2% of the database drives 30% of their revenue. And there's all sorts of different marketing strategies and philosophies around that. My experience, at least from that world, is it's really tough to scale human relationships. I mean, that's kind of a taboo thing, but I learned that you can scale the conditions for those to happen more frequently, and you can help those along, and that's where all the magic is. And I saw that through several different programs and learning different diverse markets and different ecosystems. So yeah, it's a really fascinating piece, and a lot of properties don't necessarily treat that business with like the real rigor it deserves. But yeah, like most things in life, it always boils down to the simple things, and simple is really hard, right? And so it was a lot of feedback loops, surveying, talking to casino hosts, dealing with different markets, walking into a lot of different casinos and realizing, all right, whatever we build here has to be super gooey and flexible and allow it to sort of evolve in each individual market. And, and one of the hard lessons I learned is if you don't have leadership buy-in and host buy-in and that vision isn't very clear cut, you could have a beautifully built product with a nice bow on it, and it's not going to get used necessarily. So you need buy-in too. So that's the emotional human side of it, you know.
Well, I know we're going to get into the nitty gritty a little bit later, but you spent some time in the Hamptons. This is actually outside the casino business, dealing with super high net worth individuals, and it wasn't the casino business, but I know you took away a lot of information and learnings from relationship marketing. So what did you take away from that experience that can be applied in casino marketing?
Luxury hospitality is operationally very fragile. And just because you're in a place that's, an exclusive place, the Hamptons is one of the most exclusive places I've ever experienced in the country. And everything's a handshake deal. And it's all about what's not on the calendar, and it's handshakes and networks and different ecosystems. And that's there's a lot of parallels to the casino host world. I mean, that's essentially what they're doing. It's an artful experience. A lot of things they don't want to ask for. They want to feel comfortable when they're there. And then operationally, you would think those types of places are extremely well run. And the reality is it's a hyper seasonal market. They make all their money from like May to September when the kids go back to school. And the places that survive and do it well, they're really invested in people. They pay a little bit above market. They are very much into the culture. It's tough to live there. There's a lot of, you're on a weird peninsula. There's only a couple ways to get there. So to keep and retain good staff and people who are emotionally intelligent, know how to deal with that kind of clientele and are passionate and want to take care of people. It always comes down to people, right? And so what I learned the hard way out there, it took me a couple of seasons, is you have to build a really good core team, and then create these conditions again that allow them to do what they do, which is this sort of intangible, artful relationship piece. And that's what drives the return eventually. And so the places that were successful there were the ones who were able to keep the lights on through the off season and extend. You kind of have to create your own weather out there, right? Because it's so hyper seasonal. But the places that could, when they go from a restaurant goes from 60 seats to 30, and they're able to keep a good chef on through the off season, those are the places that started to figure it out. And there's more margin there, essentially. But it was getting people to return eventually, essentially, and then being able to plug right back into that system, get return guests. It's a very selective market, right? And a lot of people don't do it well out there. So anyway, that was kind of something that was at the forefront of my lessons out there.
Well, it's interesting what you said about you need people. Well, you said customers they don't want to have to ask for things. They want it kind of just taken care of, right? I mean, at that high level, they want to just be treated like people are. The service side is just kind of predicting what they want and giving it to them ahead of time. And you said a lot of that is just having the right people, and that sounds like it could be really tough to scale. I mean, how do you select the people that you feel like have the capability to do that and just have a EQ for service, but then also how do you, I guess, put a framework around there where they're not, hey, I bought you a Mercedes how do you keep it where it's like, hey, we're not upside down to serve these people?
Yeah, I mean, it really helps to have an amazing core product, and the best people understand that you may not have the best of everything at all times. So they are able to understand that clientele and build around that. They ask them what they want, they learn what they want. And then there's always guardrails and frameworks. But I found like in the casino host world, you're supporting hosts, right? You're trying to give them as much clarity as you can. And that could be data, that could be allowing them to run their book like a business. That could be having a really solid incentive plan. That could be coding the right players to them, right? And who's taking care of who, and understanding how that property makes its money, where even at the casino level, where does the real revenue come from? Different types of games, right? Slots versus table games, different, breaking into those games. And the same was true in the Hamptons. It's like, all right, what's the value of this guest coming in? How often do they visit us? Where else do they stay? How much do they spend when they're here? And helping those I was working with end-to-end customer service with the concierges. So we were doing pre-trip planning 6 weeks in advance, grocery shopping, you had butler service the whole time, and sometimes an Escalade in the garage, right? So these people, that core product was a lot of the operation, and the difficulty was just being consistent, right? And then getting back to people. They just want follow through, a lot of times you lose customers, clientele, just because you're not following through. And we picked up a lot of business that way, and same in the casino host world, where people just go where they know what they're going to get, and it's consistent, and they like who they're dealing with, and they've dealt with that person before. So, it's a blend of that structure and getting these folks trained in culture, and then repeating it. And that's the hard part. I think we're all of us in the operation game, like that's the thing that keeps us up at night. It's the hardest thing to keep consistent. But if you surround yourself with the right people and you train them and you have a vision, it's like that magic of that teamwork. It takes a couple of seasons, but once you get going, we were able to see some daylight there and see some repeat visitation.
Obviously, our audience is mainly casino marketers, but I'm interested in learning a little bit more about the Hampton experience, because it does. I mean, serving high net worth people, whether they're spending a lot in the casino or spending a lot for just services and experience in the Hamptons, there's a lot of carryover. So with the casino, obviously we know somebody's valuable because of their past play and their ADT and their credit line, all these things. And it's like, okay, then it's a matter of just getting them in the floor, like taking care of everything. So it's good experience. And then we get the few hours on the casino floor where we make our money. It's almost like, all right, how do we deliver that great experience, control costs? Because we're not really, with a high roller, we're not really making money on the steakhouse and all that. It's really that's the cost to get them to make money on the floor. With the Hamptons, where you have butler service and Escalade and grocery shopping, and I mean, is the money really made on the services? Is it made on just they're renting this property that's very expensive, or like where was the profit coming from in the Hamptons?
Yeah, well, we were more of a national or international company product with vacation luxury vacation properties, homes to hotels across the entire world. And it was more of a subscription service. So, basically you're trying to get loyalty over time. And sometimes individual properties were a little more expensive to run than others. So your profit margin was different. For where I was in the Hamptons, which was a waterfront build out of, 30 plus units, luxury, the money is in what you're able to charge for the ADR and yielding over time and trying to build that. And so the margins are extremely tight at the beginning because you have everything from sub-zero fridges running and high maintenance costs. You're stocking everything from nice pillows to making sure and it always comes down to things like, we struggle with hot water pressure and the types of, hot water heaters that were put in. So that's where you bleed. But yeah, in terms of where the revenue was coming from, it was all just like the hotel product itself and what you could actually yield and what the potential was compared to the rest of the market. And the players out there that were able to charge exponentially more were, you have this old brand, this luxury sort of feel to it. We were trying to get there, and so is everyone else in the Hamptons, right? But it's so localized, and your local market is such a key piece for the off season. You want your locals who live there, can afford to live there and aren't tourists, to spend time at your property. So you're trying to create a place that, for lack of a better word, it's like, this is the place to be. It's cool, it feels nice, and they want to spend time there and hang out. And they're doing it because there's other artists there, there's travelers, there's it feels good to be there. It feels like a VIP kind of club, right? And so they're coming more often, and that's where the food and beverage, they're happy to spend, a large amount of money on a bottle of champagne and just keep it coming all night, right? Your food and beverage can start to pay for itself eventually, but I don't know. I sound like I haven't cracked the code, but that's some of what I experienced out there is like, how do you create this place where people want to be and they feel welcome and they're going to frequent it a lot more. And they, the competitor down the street, it's the same in the casino business. They might beat you with reinvestment. They understand how to do it. They might have a better spa. They might have a better hotel room, but the concierges and the hosts that I've worked with, they directly ask the person, like, what do you want? And a lot of it's just little things that they take care of to make it comfortable. They know what their favorite drink is. They know, I'm going to bring you a hotel key on the casino floor so you don't have to wait in line at the hotel front desk. I've got made sure your game is here, and I've got your favorite cocktail, all of that a host can line up for those priority players. That it's like a million little things that over time, once the tipping point hits, then you see this big windfall. And now you have a brand that starts to, it perpetuates on itself, and you're cycling in that space. And that's what and it's hyper competitive in the Hamptons and the casino market, as we know. It's never been more competitive.
Yeah, no, I think you articulated it really well, and it is tough it's an impossible nut to ever crack and say you've got it. But I look at the Wynn, and I just admire like what Steve Wynn built and where he kind of put that in, where it's a very service mindset, right? Like you're going to get top-notch service, and then on top the amenities, it's there, it's all top the line. You feel like you're good, and then the people there, you feel like you're amongst the upper crust of society. You're like, wow, I made it when I'm here hanging out with all these people. Yeah. So, it makes sense that's kind of the vibe that you're all shooting for out there, competing to be the spot, because the people that can afford it, they're going to go to the spot. The people that money is not an object, they just want to be at the spot, feel most comfortable. They know they're going to be taken care of. Yeah.
Like the best things in life are not really public, and that's, everyone wants to feel that they want. And I totally respect those types of brands that have scaled that at that level. And most of the time, they're not going to hit all the time, but it's really hard to do. But I don't know. That's why I've spent my career in this. I didn't expect to find myself working in VIP marketing, but here I was, we were building a 500-room hotel. We had 64 suites. We were comping, 80-90% of the house. And I was brand new to gaming. I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm watching this host team work, and I'm like, all right, well, let's start to learn from how they're doing this. And I realized I saw it firsthand. My mind was changed. Relationship marketing, all of that kind of has this icky stigma to it, right? But I saw what happened when it worked, and I'm working on understanding it fully and how that works with human brains and psychology. But I saw the power of a really good host team making good decisions and making people feel special, and like what that actually, we could drive an event and make up a huge ground on budget, or on a snow day, we could pull people in, and we could, if marketing needed help selling out an event, we could just give it to this host team. And, if it was everything lined up, we you feel pretty special. It's like, wow, we can drive business too. So, that's where it gets a little taboo-ish. It's like, okay, you're taking this human relationship element and you're making it a business driver revenue. But that's the kind of the reality of the casino world. I've lived in both of those worlds. You don't want to brandish it, but you can create systems. And the reality is like 2% is driving 30+%. In some markets, they're hosting 60% of the database, right? So if you get that right, if you don't just put a sticker on everyone, and you don't bloat lists too much. That's what I saw a lot of, when I was scaling that $1 billion program. We had really bloated lists and we were trying to do too much and be something to everyone. And so you streamline, boil it down. And then now you have this really concentrated, powerful group of hosts and customers that when you need to pull leverage, you can actually do that.
Part one, it sounds like there's a lot of parts, but the first one I just heard you say is like limiting the scope of players that your host would have to deal with. And so maybe you could talk about one, what are the benefits of that, of instead of dealing with 1,000 players, you've got a 300. And then two, how do you identify who those 300 are? How do you identify the 700? Hey, these people, maybe they're the same daily value, but they don't need to host. So how do you go about doing that? And then again, what are the benefits of limiting the scope for your hosts?
Yeah, I feel like that could be a whole book, but it's what I learned through and this is my experience through the Hamptons piece is here we're trying to scale this program to 40 properties. They've been under 3 different hoods of casino owners, and it's always in the simple is really hard, and it's always in the simple stuff, but we're dealing with massive amounts of data and we're testing it over time to, we're like, why is this criteria X and it's different here? But, whatever we did, we would look at the results. And, at that time we had this predictive analytics model. So we were setting goals at the player level. We were coding players and predicting their play and then adding a lift and had a good goal program around it. Right. So we learned over time and we started to see these trends of, well, this player's been cycled through the program many times. You survey them. Oh, I don't know who my host is. I've been contacted by 4 different hosts so it wasn't a clean data cleansing process. And so we tried to shore that up. And a lot of the non-sexy work we did was just like getting a consistent coding process in place, whatever the property criteria was, it would flex by markets, but you got to look at annual worth. You got to look at recency. You got to look at the reinvestment for the player and what they're actually worth to the property, right? If you have that clean data and clarity. So then we started setting up these test groups, and it got to a point where we're like, all right, we have enough data here to run something. It was a hard conversation with GMs because you're actually talking about, hey, we think we could reduce your host population by 30%. And as soon as you say that, people get a little tight, and we're like, look, we have testing and data to show this. It worked in this market and this market. But the irony was by reducing the host list by 30%, we had an average player value that was 50% worth 50% more. And then the overall program showed 10% more in Theo, right? So not saying we grew 10%, but it's just, if you have $1 billion program and you're showing we can host 30% fewer players, and they're worth 50% more on average, and the program is worth 10% more, that's $100 million that you're now saying, this is a higher quality player. We're going to give it to the hosts to work from this pool versus this pool. And then now you have, again, it always comes down to supporting hosts. So if your hosts are good and they're trained well and you have a good culture, giving them a higher quality player just exponentially, you would assume that it's going to drive better results. But the hosts are happier. They understand why these players are coded to them. It's consistent. And they trust it now. Now they have this player. We're going to keep them for at least, 6 months if we say, we're going to code this player. And instead of moving players in and moving them out and putting stickers on them. So anyway, not to get too far into the weeds, but that was a big takeaway for us is like, ooh, we can actually focus on a smaller subset of players who are worth more. Now you get into the criteria and you can have a lot of philosophical discussions about, but whatever it is, you can test it. And a lot of people don't want to test in the casino hosting world because that's a big gray area, but you're dealing with thousands and thousands of players. You have cusp players, you have criteria that changes. And so if you're just consistent and watch what happens on both ends, you can get to smarter decision-making, I think. It's my experience.
And so in dropping the 30% of players that did have a host, and now the players that are being hosted are higher value on average because you dropped the lower ones. Now, were these people already hosted, the higher end ones, and they just didn't get as much attention because the host's attention was spread? Or were you like, hey, these are high value players that for whatever reason aren't being hosted now that we've discovered, we're going to add them to the bucket? Or was it strictly like, hey, all these players are already hosted, we just need to drop the 30% so our hosts have more time and it's clearer for them who they need to focus on?
Yeah, it was a lot of different things, depended on the market. In some markets, we weren't cleaning host lists much at all. In some markets, they're hugely fat, and you had players. Most of the time, you were catching the bigger players just naturally based on Theo or 80 high ADT. But it was a lot of those like large annual worth players that were lower ADT players that, you can have a different strategy for them. And, less reinvestment on the comping side, comps become more of a loyalty piece, but those players were your bread and butter. And a lot of those players were being missed or cycled in and cycled back out. And then your hosts are great auditors, right? So if we gave them high quality players based on what they would chew up and spit out like, look, I've hosted this guy, I've tried this, I know their personal situation. So, you just try to put some reins on the churn that was happening. And so we didn't have a perfect criteria ever. I think that's really tough to do, but you can get to a pretty good blend where you're considering all of those different things and different game types and what those, but really it's funny in the casino world because you have reinvestment where you have your base loyalty program, it's just peanuts. Usually it's an arms race. You have to do it, right? It's not much. And then you have your promotional and direct mail marketing, which you can get really sophisticated with. And then you have the casino host world where it's like 2% of the database or 5% of the database. They drive a huge amount of revenue. And you have this discretionary comp reinvestment. And then your labor is expensive, right? Good hospitality is expensive because it's labor based. So when you start to think about that as a machine and a model and a different part of your arm of marketing, and you start to budget discretionary comp and look at how are we spending discretionary comp and what do we see, what are the decisions hosts are making? Are they good, bad, ugly? I don't see a lot of the same structure that goes into the casino host world that you would from we really look at reinvestment overall, but you start to get lost in the casino host world a little bit. So anyway, but to answer your question it's kind of a test, right? What happens, who can we move the needle on when we have hosts that are essentially, they're spending other people's money to make money. Let's look at those decisions really hard. And I think it's fascinating. Like the world of discretionary comping to me is just a fascinating universe, and how really, good hosts know how to do it. They spread it. In some cases we had a host like barely comping at all. It's like, well, you're not on the floor enough, we need you to be doing this and making, and then some hosts just spending it on the top, the players that make them feel good and spending all their time there. Right. So anyway, it's a wide spectrum.
You identified an issue where there's some hosts aren't investing enough in these players. And with the thesis being like, hey, the more we invest in these players or within a range, the more we're going to get out of them. There's a return on investment for comping. And some people are not doing it enough. And some are comping way too much where there's not gains. We're losing money because you're comping too much. So once you identified that, what did you do?
We just put clarity to it. We built visual dashboards to help with that. There were quarterly reviews. There's accountability, in terms of the leadership sitting down with the host and like, all right, tell me about your top 5 players. And then we've spent this, and tell me about your players that are fading, and let's look at reinvestment. It always comes down to the leadership and just giving them the tools to like be able to see everything from a bird's eye view and then drill down into the details if they need it. And hopefully if you have good leadership, they're spending time with those hosts to get into some of that scrutiny. And of course there's the compliance piece and all of that. There's already quarterly reports or monthly reports that are built there. But, I think spending more time at looking at, casinos spend a ton of money in discretionary comp. And so I think that's an easy solution to look at. And of course, there's the world of advantage players, right? There's players that hosts can identify like, look, we're spending a ton of reinvestment and comp on these players, but based on game type and all of this, they're not profitable to us over a long period of time. And so there's reporting for that too, So yeah, I mean, scaling, it's always putting in the fundamentals and clarity, and then just being really consistent with it and making sure people are looking at it, and that was the hard part of the job, is like, are we all looking at the same thing? And there's always nuances, and especially in the world of coding players and casino hosts, you could always find some rogue scenario. But at least you can flag them and have the conversation. And if you have good leadership, I mean, they're having those talks and they're thinking about it from a business perspective, like what's good for the property and long-term and the player.
The player's already been through the cycle a few times. And it made it sound like there was the way I heard it is like you had a kind of a 6-month window or something where a player would come in and then maybe they got extra attention from a host, and the program is expecting a certain lift, and then they graduate out of the program. Maybe you could expand on that. Like, 'cause I did pick up on that. You said,
okay, yeah.
So what is that cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it was one piece of it that was interesting where you're, all right, let's look at the host database. We're surveying, we have survey data, we have feedback loop from the player. Have they been contacted? Do they know who their host is? Have you been comped? You know, whatever. It was a simple 10-question survey that we ran regularly. And then you have the database criteria, and we could see when we started looking at host flags and how many times this player had been hosted. And now you get down to the lower level of players where this is where the churn is. You have a 150 ADT player. They might be worth $6K a year, but they come frequently. You know, we'd see some scenarios where this guy's been hosted on and off over the last 3 years, like eight or nine times. And then when we survey them, they don't know who their host is. And so what is the value of the host program at that level? And then you start to make some hard decisions. Well, let's take some of that group and decode them, and let's take some of them and code them, and then let's figure out. But if we're going to do that, let's put some guardrails on it and make sure that they stay with the host at least for 2 quarters versus going in, then going out, and going in and going out. So, I mean, it's a simple parameter, but it gets missed in the quarterly reviews and coding processes that are happening at these properties where you're coding thousands of players and you're trying to bring in the best leads every quarter. And you know, it's competitive, right? So you want to make sure you're always picking up the highest potential players. And then you can get into many discussions around what that criteria should be for what, but you know, whatever it is, it's sort of like just being consistent. If you're going to bring somebody in this quarter because you believe in that criteria, let's give it time to work, you know, and let's make sure at the end of the quarter that the host has actually contacted this player, right? A few times, and they've been invited to some events, and they can actually get some of that tangible hosting product. And that's what I would see when we have those big bloated lists. Like, everybody felt good because we were hosting all of these players and it represented a lot of money. But when we dug into it, it's like, well, what is hosting? You know, where do you start to define that? And it's that relationship piece, and the host has to buy into, this is a player who's worthy of my time. You're protecting host time too. I mean, you spread these guys too thin and they're not focused, and you can't get the same results, you know, in that sense. That's just, you know, from my experience.
No, it makes a lot of sense. You're right. You could, I'm coding 1 million players for this host. It's like, okay.
Feels good. Yeah, it feels great.
Yeah.
He's got a $6 million goal this quarter, but was he able to get through his entire list and contact, you know, different various, you know, contact methods? But what does that actually look like? And then if you decode that player after 1 quarter, you know, you're not doing anyone any service, right? The player or the host.
Okay. So if step 1 is come in and listen, we're hosting too many people. Let's narrow it down. Then what's step 2? I mean, step 1 in narrowing it, it's also, hey, hosts, the expectation is you're going to talk to these players a lot more. We need you being more active and actually driving business. It's not, oh, I've got this massive list and, oh, look at these players are here today. Maybe I'll pop over and say hi, but you're not driving business. So yeah, how do you scale that across multiple properties? And yeah, I guess you mentioned leadership. How do you get leadership to buy in? What's that transition from like a lot of players to now, hey, you're expected to sell and build relationships? How do you do that?
I don't know if I know the answer to it, but what the approach that I've taken and what I've learned from was, let's just trust these hosts as like business operators and business owners, and let's make sure there's a culture that they're running a business. So you give them the visibility to their book every quarter. They can understand what every player's worth. And now we were doing some pretty cool stuff in the world of predictive analytics, and we were trying to forecast what each player is going to play that quarter. Like, okay, well, the host program has a cost. Discretionary comping has a cost, reinvestment. What does that lift need to be? And if your goal setting methodology is good, right, and you have a bonus program that's in line with that, with the behavior that you want, and it's always simple stuff, right? Now you have a host team they can get bought in. And when you do that, I mean, that's the only way that I know how to scale it. It's like trust, and then giving them, like, tech is just, it's not the be all end all, but it does provide clarity. And so if a host can slice up their entire book and understand survey scores and how many times I've contacted this player and who's fading, who's moving, who's my biggest part, who carries the biggest weight to my goal, they will just naturally start to focus on that. Now, the leadership was the piece that I learned, you know, if the leadership isn't bought into that model, they're not going to hold the host I hate to say accountable, but hosts want to do a good job. They're people who are driven from taking care of people, but they also enjoy the business component. Like, hey, if I can hit my number this quarter, I get X. And so help me get there. So the best hosts that I saw, they run it like a business. They're really good at what they do in terms of service, but they're playing a game too. You know, they want to make that number at the end of the quarter, and they're just going to naturally, but they can't see, you know, it's like a lot of times they don't have the visibility to their list to run it like a true business, just like you would at URComped, right? You're looking at where I'm spending my money, or my analytics, all of that. It's just literally, it's not complicated, but it's just boiling it down to them and getting a trusted set of dashboards, data. And it's not the be all end all, but it certainly is the best way to move the needle. When I was trying to scale that to 40 properties, like, all right, we just have consistent dashboards, consistent KPIs. We can flex by market a little bit, but the fundamentals are the same, right?
Surveys, I think that's pretty cool. And I don't think it's something a lot of properties are taking advantage of. I mean, theoretical and all that. I think most are doing that, or trying to do it, where it's like, hey, here's the number you're trying to hit, here's where you're at, and you better start selling or drive some of these trips. But how would you use survey data? How did that come into play?
Oh yeah, that was ingrained in me because I came up in a service culture, very strong service culture with Ameristar Casinos. If anybody, they were 8 properties. Craig Nielsen was the founder. I mean, he was a visionary. I watched what he did in certain markets. That's how I cut my teeth, even in the Blackhawk Ameristar market, where he's building a hotel during a recession and people thought he was crazy, right? But he invested in people, and it was very service focused. And our CMO was a drill sergeant about host surveys, right? Because you have a service-based relationship model here. So I kind of came up in that, and it was always 1 to 2 minute survey. How are we doing? Have you been contacted? Those types of things. Do you know who your host is? We baked that into how we evaluated the host program. It's just naturally like, if you have a bonus program, for example, you want it to be gooey enough that the market can adopt it no matter where it is. But we made a portion of that bonus weighted on service, right? Not to a point that you want to create a bias, with hosts, like, I'm going to overcomp here or there. But yeah, it just made sense to me. And so it's kind of your eyes and ears. In terms of how you're doing with service and our players being contacted. It's a simple way to do it.
We've covered a lot of ground. I think there's still a lot of meat on the bone for another interview. But one thing before we wrap up, somebody's listening to this, you've given a lot of things. It's like, oh man, I don't even know where to start. What would you tell a casino executive, like, hey, what should you inspect right now to figure out if your casino host program is in a healthy spot?
Yeah, I would if you understand what you're reinvesting into that portion of your business and what they're worth, and I would ask the question, are you giving it all the resources it needs, from a training of hosts to the culture that's built around it, and then looking at all the metrics from survey, like, being able to evaluate it from all different factors, from the business side of it to the service side, and do you have a performing team that's taking care of those really extremely valuable players, right? And what kind of vision and clarity do those hosts have that are essentially executing that part of the business for you, right? On top of all of your other reinvestment in your loyalty program and direct mail. So yeah, and some properties, depending on the market, it's not, the value can differ, right? On whether you're a real true VIP market or not. But yeah, that's just how I tend to think about things. Like, this is one of those things that you can, are you actually scaling the conditions? If you believe in player development, right? If you believe in that, are you actually building the systems and levers in place for your team to like really scale? And basically most of my career has just been spent like, how do we spread host love to a larger group of players? Because I believe in it, right? Mm-hmm. But how do you do that in a way where it's still effective and you don't burn out the host? So that's what I would ask them, is kind of like, do you have a good ecosystem for those hosts to not get burned out, to do their jobs really well? And if you believe in PD, that's a fair question to ask.
I learned a ton. This is a very thought-provoking interview. I'm sure there's lots of casino executives that are their minds are, they've got a lot to think about, a lot to chew on. Now, if they want to get a hold of you, discuss some of these ideas, what's the best place they can go?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm on LinkedIn under just Travis Grode, and Plum Couch Hospitality is my consultancy. if you go to travisgrode.art, there's a section for Plum Couch Hospitality there, just to get some more background on what I do and some case studies, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm reachable out there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think a lot of casinos be well served, because I think it's nice. Your analytical approach to things, I think, is valuable, because I know I'm learning a lot from it. So I'm sure a lot of others will. So Travis, we got to do this again. This was
For
great.
sure.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you very much. Thanks for having me on, Craig. Let's do it again.